Welcome to Agile to Agility podcast with Miljan, Bajic.
Major show alert!
The very first value we wrote is individuals and interactions.
Let's take this to another level.
The way to look at leadership is not just the CEO, not just the C-suite. It's leadership is a capability that can be exhibited in everybody's role.
All right, so who is Nick Horney and what's been your journey?
Hey, Miljan, yeah, thank you again for the opportunity and a chance to share my journey. As many that may be watching this can tell, it's been a little bit longer journey with all the gray hair. But it's maybe it's not a typical journey that you might find most people that are working in as an Agile professional or an agility professional. So my journey really began when I learned a lot about the kind of the life and death scenarios in terms of working in Navy special operations. I did that after completing my college program and went directly into the Navy as a Navy officer. And for special operations, for those of you that may not be aware of that, that's an umbrella term that really characterizes Navy SEALs, explosive ordnance disposal, deep sea diving, et cetera. And most of my work was explosive ordnance disposal and deep sea diving, submarine salvage, that type of thing. So when I say that I learned about agility basically as a result of my experience, I could really distinguish between those teams and those leaders that were really were faster, focused, flexible, et cetera, characteristics that could describe better leadership. At that time, I didn't have a term that I used for that. I was busily trying to do the work that I was doing, but I've been able to reflect back on that and look back at my history, which was 23 years, of that, and look back at that and said, well, what are those characteristics that really make a difference in good leaders and really great leaders? And that was the leadership agility, component of that. So I took that and I got out of the Navy, at least called active duty. I got off of active duty, remained as a reservist in the Navy, and got my PhD in organizational psychology. So I wanted to apply psychology to the business world. And in those days, essentially, again, agility was not a buzz term, and this is back in the early 80s. It was mostly focused on quality initiatives as well as process improvement and as well as change management. Change management, certainly was critically important in terms of SAP implementation, big dollar technology implementation efforts, et cetera. And so I really got my early exposure there, and I left corporate America, which was Nestle and PepsiCo, left to start up my own consulting firm, and then was acquired by, at that time, Coopers & Lybrand, which became PricewaterhouseCoopers, to start up and manage their change management practice. So even though we weren't utilizing the term agility, we were really thrust in the middle of defining what were the leadership characteristics that made a difference in being able to manage and effectively deal with change. And then later on was recruited by the Center for Creative Leadership as part of their executive team, and hence much more focus on leadership agility, et cetera. And that's a global, Center for Creative Leadership is a global leadership development and research organization, usually identified as the number 1, 2, or 3 that does that. And then subsequently left there in 2001 to start up Agility Consulting, because I thought that change management itself had changed quite a bit based on the marketplace, then to use a term that the Army came up with called VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I felt as though there wasn't enough attention being focused on that, research being focused on that, et cetera. So that's what I did. 2001, I started Agility Consulting, and then subsequently focused on leadership, team, and organizational agility, not agile methodology. Our focus is on behavior and behavioral change.
Could you maybe just remind me? I don't think I spoke with anybody on the podcast about like traditional notion of change management and what it meant in the 80s and 90s versus what do you think it means today? Because like you said, there is a difference, and we use that term loosely, change management, but in what ways has that evolved from your perspective?
No, that's a great question. And I think it really has evolved. Change management going back into the 70s and 80s really was thought of as, okay, it was something that you did at a point in time. In other words, there was a model.
You bring in the consultants.
Well, there are a number of models and frameworks out there that they really thought of change as being something that you did to an organization or a project, et cetera, and you applied the change tools, mostly behavioral change tools, and then kind of disrupted the way things were doing, and then you went back to, so it was the whole idea of taking an existing process and you unfreeze that and you make process improvements, changes in it, people changes, et cetera, and then you refreeze that. I think the main difference now is that that change is never refrozen. We live in a dynamic VUCA world where change is just happening all the time, and not just with pandemics, but with digital disruption and change coming at us in all kinds of directions. So fundamentally, there is not a refreezing of the organization back into that, its former state.
Would you also say that it's like changes everybody's business? Like back in those days, like it was like you had a specific teams that drove the change. Now, like, everybody needs to understand and be part of that change just because, like you said, because of the VUCA environment that we're in.
Absolutely. In fact, a couple of earlier books that I wrote really was focused on integrating change management with project management. So, I come from the era where you had those experts, as you said, there were experts in project management and then experts in change management. And oftentimes never the two would really effectively integrate. It's modularized almost. So you're preaching to someone who very much believes in the whole integration of that everyone needs to really understand that change is ongoing, that it's embedded in literally everything that we're involved in. A project that gets initiated 1 month, you need to build change into that because the next month you may already be implementing a number of changes and need to be aware of the kind of processes involved.
What's going on? Yeah. So what's, I look at the book behind you, VUCA Masters, and I think my initial was like, okay, what is this VUCA Masters? What? So could you maybe elaborate on the title of your book and what does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, VUCA Masters is a term that I wanted to, just use as kind of disrupt the maybe the reading audience and ask that very same question. What are VUCA Masters? And the way I've defined VUCA Masters, first of all, accepting the fact that our world is so disruptive that it really is going to be full of change and ongoing change. Certainly into the near future and beyond that. If anything, it's going to be getting faster and faster, and we're going to have information at our hands, at our fingertips that we already do now, but even more so, on into the future. So if we accept the fact that change is all around us in the marketplace, in our own environment, that where we live, our own personal lives, et cetera, it is a way of living that we have to come to terms with. So I wanted to really emphasize that we could all go after becoming a VUCA master, similar to if you think of it, and the extended title is about developing leadership agility fitness. So I like to use the metaphor of leadership agility fitness as tying into something that we all do, perhaps at least on an annual basis. We all should get an annual physical, and at that time the doctor has blood drawn. We get on the scales and see how heavy we are. We look at our eating habits. We look at our sleep patterns and our exercise, et cetera. It's all of those things combined that's going to make a difference in terms of how physically fit we are. And the doctor basically is serving as our agile coach, if you will, being able to provide feedback on an annual basis and say, okay, Nick, you need to eat less or more balanced meal, get some more sleep, whatever it may be. But he helps put a plan together. So the argument that I make in the book is that in order to become a VUCA master, which is someone that is really skilled and at the peak performance in all areas of what I introduced in 2001 called the Agile model, and I'll describe that in just a minute. But being able to be at peak performance in all of those areas is a VUCA master, regardless of the change that they may have to deal with, whether it's a personal change, it may be something as simple as your daughter is getting married, or it may be something as dramatic as a pandemic. How are you being able to demonstrate VUCA mastery, or in other words, leadership agility fitness to be able to deal with all of those? So if you're really fit, if your leadership agility fitness is at the peak in all of those, the 5 areas of the Agile model, then you are well on your way to becoming a VUCA master.
So it's really, and I like that analogy because I think it reminded me of Simon Sinek's talk where he talked about like you cannot, leadership is not something that you just do. It's something that you practice all the time. So it's, the analogy that you're saying, it's like, I can't just, if I know I'm going to do maybe assessment with a coach, or I just want to have a conversation, I can't get in shape in 9 hours or 2 days in what I'm doing. It's something that you do all the time. And the litmus test is really for leaders in organizations, how well am I dealing with the current environment? Like if I asked others, and I'm sure like, with these type of assessments, there's 360, what are other people telling me? How am I dealing with the environment and situations that I'm in? So I like it. So could you maybe talk about
Miljan? I appreciate that too, because I think that is an important message. Whether you are an Agile coach, or whether you are a leader of a business function or a CEO or whatever, it's as is important for you to be able to reflect and be able to have a way of reflecting on what is your leadership and how is it being perceived by others. Your key stakeholders. And so with a 360, like we recommended in the book, being able to take at least at a minimum one time per year, once a year, being able to, just like you would a physical fitness exam, be able to do your leadership agility fitness exam, so that in fact you can identify, based on the changing world, and it's changing so rapidly, what are those areas? What are those things that I really need to be focused in on over the next period of time?
Yeah, this might be a simple question, or simple question in terms of, what it asks, but it is, so how does leadership affect organizational success? If we look at the research over the last 10 years, there's a lot of research that points to leadership. But from your perspective, why focus on leadership? Why and success of the organization? It might be due to many factors, but what are from your perspective and experience, why would you say, why focus on leaders?
Yeah, I think focusing on leaders is critically important. Organizations, again, have been organized that way for many, many years. But the way to look at leadership is not just the CEO, not just the C-suite. It's leadership is a capability that can be exhibited in everybody's role. An individual contributor can demonstrate leadership. A project manager can demonstrate leadership. And the importance of leadership is not just standing up on a soapbox and being able to shout out orders and have everybody follow you. It is more and more about, yes, certainly having a vision, but how do you engage others? How do you engage stakeholders in what is that vision of success for your organization, and understanding and anticipating the kind of changes that your organization is going to be dealing with, but really getting everybody involved in that process in some way, some form, so that in fact everybody that is contributing to the organization really understands the vision and the direction. It's not handed down from a mountain on high, that the leadership team comes down from the mountain with these tablets and says, okay, here is our vision and here's our strategy, here's the direction we're going to go. More and more is really required of really investing in, or leaders, senior leaders, to invest in all of their employees, and certainly all that are in certainly leadership roles, regardless of what those roles are called, so that in fact they can see the value in that. And that will have a tremendous amount on success. It's not just the best technology that you're going to have that's in place. It's not just having scrum teams. It's not just having any new methodology that may be there. It is a combination of people, process, and technology that's going to be the real winning solution in the long run. I'm
also assuming that if there's a tight correlation between how the readiness or fitness of leadership in organization to organizational success at all levels. So if you look at the fitness, general fitness of the organization and leadership in organization, and tie that to the success of the organization, there's tight correlation, and there's probably even tighter correlation to the fitness of the executives and the board to the organization. And maybe to come back to change management, do you think that change is possible without having executives and the board that score pretty high on that fitness or capability to lead? So essentially, could we have successful transformations and change in organizations if leadership fitness, either using your scale? I recently spoke with Sally Alada from doesn't matter what assessment you use, you could just come up with your own, but in generally speaking, relatively speaking, do you think there is chance that organizations could be successful if their organizational executives don't have that leadership agility and ability to contextualize things and lead in VUCA world?
Yeah, I think, and that's a great question. And I think that what you'll find is that these executives, if they are not embracing, the whole concept of agility. And now, again, I'm not emphasizing agile methodology, but I'm talking about being able to adapt and thrive in a constantly changing VUCA world. That leaders, and I'm talking primarily about CEOs and those at the C-suite, and even down lower than that, they're not going to be around. The board will not allow that to happen. The board, again, if you have the right board, they're going to be holding the CEO accountable. And clearly you could see, and I could see in my work that we do with clients, could see those clients that really were most successful with the pandemic and dealing with the pandemic were able to apply, again, the Agile model. Like you said, Miljan, that there could be a variety of models. There can be a variety of assessments, but they should be research-based. I believe very much in research-based, not just grabbing some nice questions that, this sounds like this might be good, et cetera. And we've done over 20 years worth of research around the 5 major elements of what really defines, leadership agility, and that's included in the Agile model. But if for example, one element of the Agile model is around anticipating change. And anticipating change is really all about really understanding the kinds of patterns, the trends, et cetera, not even necessarily in your own industry sector, but it's looking around and being aware of what's happening in the world around you so that, in fact, you can get ahead of that.
Exactly.
The leaders and the boards that are holding leaders accountable are the ones that are not going to let a leader, not going to let a CEO continue to get surprised by the marketplace, by a competitor, by a supplier, by any of those things, because they're going to be behind the game, behind the 8 ball, if you will, of always trying to play catch up. The good leaders, really with a combination of these kind of competencies that I've defined in the Agile model, first and foremost, they do anticipate change. They understand the kinds of disruptions that are coming at them, and they are engaging the workforce. So generating confidence, they're engaging the workforce so that, in fact, they're not the only ones to anticipate change. It's all employees that talk to suppliers and key stakeholders and other employees and identify other things that are happening with their competitors to be able to build that kind of confidence and that commitment to the kinds of changes that are demanded. And it may be disrupting things the way things have always been. Well, we've done it that way for the past 5 years. Well, guess what? The next 5 years are not going to, in fact, the next 1 year is not going to enable that to be successful. So that's the importance of applying a framework and an approach like the Agile model that does take into account a really solid research base and allows leaders, whether you are a project manager leading an Agile transformation, for example, you need to be keenly aware of the disruption and the changes that are going on in your organization, outside of the organization, so that, in fact, you can help identify the kinds of changes, the kinds of disruptions that may derail the particular transformation initiative that you've got going on.
Yeah, so let's maybe, so sorry to interrupt, but let's maybe go through the Agile model. So like the first one, you mentioned the first two, like anticipating change and generating confidence, but let's come back to anticipating change. And I really like like you have the 3 almost subcategories under each. So under anticipate change, you have visioning, sensing, and monitoring. And what you described as you were talking about, I was thinking about anticipating change, and really the big one that stands out for me is the sensing and sense making, right? Like in Agile, we talk about a lot of times using Canadian framework to sense what type of environment you're in and contextualizing our approach based on that. You mentioned the psychology earlier and like understanding, like sensing what type of people you're working with, how much ego there is in the room as a leader, and how do I need to change my approach if I'm working with a bunch of other guys that are full of ego. And, clashing against their ego is probably not going to be good leadership strategy in that instance or some instances. So like that sense making is so crucial in so many levels. Visioning, obviously, as a leader, inspiring that vision, creating that. And obviously, that whole idea of inspect and adapt in Agile or empirical approaches, the monitoring piece. So could you elaborate on those 3 from your perspective? How do you see visioning, sensing, and monitoring under the anticipate change?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to what are the 5 major, the large areas that compose the Agile model. And so each one of those is broken down into those subcategories. What we're trying to do is to describe behaviors of leaders. And in this case, the sensing and the monitoring and the visioning, et cetera, are critically important, and they can be measured. And that's part of why the emphasis on leadership, agility, fitness, of being able to identify how well do you do as a leader at sensing, how well do you do as a leader at monitoring. It's not good enough to just have a vision, or it's not good enough just to do sensing without some monitoring. So, okay, I'm good at sensing. That means that I'm looking out over the horizon or around the corner, and I'm sensing by trend analysis and other techniques and scenario planning that there are some changes that are likely that they might occur. But to what degree have you built in a process so that you and your team, your organization is monitoring that? To what degree are you actually looking at that over a period of time to know whether that's accelerating, whether it's slowing down, whether it's something you shouldn't need to be looking at any longer? But it's mostly about the human behavior aspect of it, so that in fact leaders can get feedback on a detailed level report in a 360 like this that'll come back to a leader. There are 5 questions around each of those 3 of visioning, sensing, and monitoring, so that in fact the report that you receive is an output that reflects how well are you doing that from the perspective of all your stakeholders, your peers, your direct reports, your boss, you, etc. And to what degree are there major differences in those? And that's where the work really needs to be done in terms of closing those gaps.
Yeah. And that's really interesting too, because, when I think about it, then you also have to have leaders that want increase their awareness, right? Like, going through and asking those questions and willingness to get peer feedback is, in a way, exposing yourself, and you're being vulnerable. And, a lot of times people don't want to do that. So what are some of the things, maybe when it comes to specifically assessments and leadership that's tied to it? Is there any, or do you have any observations or data on, how people respond to these based on their leadership levels? Because I'm assuming some people are more open to it. And I go back, I remember the times when I wanted feedback, I would ask for feedback and I would get all pissed off, like, you don't know what you're talking about. This is not me, right? And not looking at the feedback as just somebody else's perspective, rather than, almost judging it. So
let me use the physical fitness as a metaphor and as an example of that. So let's say it's time for your annual physical, and you have been really working out this past year. You've been going to the gym, you've been running a lot, you've been pumping a lot of weight, you stand in front of the mirror, you flex those muscles, and man, oh man, am I in great physical shape. But you've not been paying attention to how much sleep you're getting. You haven't been paying much attention to the kind of food that you've been intaking, et cetera. So now you sit down and you sit in front of the doctor and you go, you're expecting to get this great feedback report. Wow, super, look at me. Let me flex for you, doc. And the doctor says, well, that's really good, but there are these other stakeholders, if you will. There are these other elements of being physically fit that you're forgetting about. It's good quality of sleep. You've got to be paying attention to aerobic fitness as well. You've been ignoring maybe running, and your heart is not doing what it should be doing, or you're eating too high a cholesterol diet, et cetera. The same is true, I think, in terms of 360s. If you're only, in the majority of cases, we have kind of grown up, many leaders in the past have kind of gotten to the point by only getting feedback from their boss. And so they're technically competent, and then they've gotten promoted. But they haven't gotten feedback from their peers, and they haven't gotten feedback from their direct reports, and maybe they haven't gotten feedback from their suppliers. And so it's an incomplete assessment of that person's leadership fitness, leadership agility fitness. So I think that's the best way of describing it. Just like when you go through a 360, it can be intimidating. You're a bit fearful of what others might be saying, but isn't it better to know
Exactly.
Better to be
Well,
able
you
to
would think that's what I was
reveal.
saying. Like, but some people might be like, no, I'm too busy, or, in a sense, what I'm getting at is mindset is a big part of this whole thing, and the approach of leadership, desire to get better. If you truly have the desire to get better, you probably would consider something like this. But I work with a lot of leaders, and I ask them to do stuff like this, and they just don't have the time, or they don't want to expose themselves, and there's a lot of resistance that I get. And for the ones that I would generally consider just subjectively more mature in their leadership styles, more adaptive to the situation, they're usually the ones that are more open to it. But maybe we can come back to this. I want to keep going through the Agile model. So we talked about anticipating changes being the first one. Generating confidence is the second one. So in what ways can leaders generate confidence?
Probably the best way of generating confidence is being able to certainly ask questions of ask opinions, if you will, of the workforce in terms of how work gets done. I mean, it's not all that difficult, and it's a way of being able to. I mean, there've been plenty of research done, and many of those listening have certainly understand the value of employee engagement. Generating confidence is just that. It is looking at the kinds of approaches like understanding what employee engagement is all about, asking questions of employees about the implementation of a key initiative. What are the things that we need to look out for? And getting them involved very early on with important key initiatives that are going to impact their lives. So more than anything, it's just that. I was working with a senior level exec who had gotten promoted based on his technical skills, and very, very sharp, very, very bright, very intelligent, and 99% of the time he had the right answer. Part of the problem is as an executive coach, that was part of the problem, is that he had the right answer as opposed to engaging and involving and developing his team, future leaders of the organization, and getting their ideas and their thoughts, and actually enabling them and recognizing them and going with an initiative that they may be wanting to go after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really, I mean, and under that category, you have, ability to connect, align, and engage. And those definitely ring true. And because that confidence is also about relationship building. That confidence is internal confidence, right? So the more that you see that you enable others and confidence in others, the more that you're confident as a leader. So it goes both ways, helping others instill confidence, but it's also instilling confidence in yourself. The third one is initiating action. Could you maybe talk about that and why that is important as part of the model?
Yeah, initiating action is what we often find when we do our organizational agility, surveys and also our leadership, agility surveys, is that we'll find that decision making is a crucial stumbling block for many. Oftentimes, a client organization thinks that it is proactive and it initiates action. But often what we may find out is that there are multiple levels of approval, that have to be made for a particular decision. Or even I've worked with project teams that have come together from cross-functional, organizational groups, maybe some from marketing, some from IT, some from engineering, et cetera. And within each of those organizational functional groups, their decision-making approach is different. Maybe it has to go to their boss for approval. Maybe it's a consensus decision in another department, et cetera. But when it comes together as a project team, they've not agreed on what is the decision authority, what's the decision rules for this particular project. And that's something that's pretty important. So it really has as much to do with, if you've gone through the other two elements of the Agile model, you've anticipated change, you understand the vision, you've gotten people more committed and confident and engaged, et cetera. They know the direction that you want to be going in. Then initiating action is also about pushing that decision-making authority to that lowest possible level. And as a leader, basically getting out of the way and becoming a good coach and a good mentor, as opposed to a block in the way decisions are reached. Now, there'll be some that are critical and strategic decisions. Obviously, you're going to be able to bump them up, but the vast majority of decisions can be reached at lower levels. Hence, increasing the speed at which decisions can be reached, and you can deal with adjustments and adapting to changing marketplace concerns.
Yeah. And I think, when we talk about at least Scrum and Agile, a lot of it has to do with changing the decision rights, who makes decisions, decentralizing a lot. So what about the fourth one that's part of your model is liberate thinking? So how do leaders liberate thinking in their organizations?
Yeah, liberate thinking it's not liberal thinking. So it's not, we're not dealing with politics here. Liberate thinking really is a leader's part of a crucial leadership role is to create the kind of environment that encourages some risk taking. And so liberating thinking is just that. Just because we've done something a certain way for the past year, the past 3 years, 5 years, whatever it may be, then ask questions. There's nothing better than to bring a new employee into a team meeting, et cetera, and that person is asking the question, well, why do you do it that way? Why do you do it that way? And keep asking the question why. It's kind of like 5 whys, and keep getting behind that. So liberate thinking really is a key accountability of a leader. To be able to keep the organization fresh and innovative, et cetera, and a way of being able to create the environment, the culture.
I was going to say,
says we need to be keeping things fresh here. I need you on my team, and you're talking to others outside of our organization. You're seeing what others are doing. You're seeing what others are doing outside the industry. You're going to some conferences, et cetera. Bring that back and ask the question, at least in terms of why we do it our way, our particular way, and maybe there's some new ways to doing things.
Yeah, and it's almost like that liberating thinking, and it's really like how as a leader am I creating an environment where people can self-organize, where they can be more, they can have more autonomy to do things, and like you said, bring stuff like that, and not just question what am I going to say as a leader. So it's really about, in my opinion, about enablement of that thinking and action, I guess, too. So
and remember, a VUCA Master is one that is at the peak of all 5 of these that we're discussing right now. So they're really strong at anticipating change and at generating confidence. So it's not as if you can really demonstrate VUCA mastery or leadership agility fitness if you're only strong at liberating thinking. You may be liberating thinking of a workforce that really doesn't have a clue as to what the vision is and any sense of what may be happening, in the marketplace in terms of disruption. They don't feel confident in terms of being engaged in the decision making. And now you're saying, well, bring in some new ideas to me. Well, they may tell you to build a car when you're in the industry that's building only airplanes. So it doesn't do so good.
Yeah. And then the last one here is evaluate results. So we have anticipate change, generate confidence, initiate action, liberate thinking, and then the last one, evaluate results. So how could you maybe give some examples of how leaders can evaluate results?
The best way for a leader to evaluate results is to ask questions, and it's important the kinds of questions that you ask. If you're truly trying to transform an organization to be demonstrate more agility, et cetera, then you build in some of the processes and around that. One organization that we were working with actually created a little 3x5 card that every meeting, they were going to organize the meeting, whether it's a departmental meeting, whether it's a change meeting, whatever, project team meeting, whatever it may be, around those 5 major core elements of the Agile model. What have we done since we last met to anticipate change? What have we done to generate confidence, initiate action, liberate thinking, evaluate results? And the project team leader needs to be asking those questions. So you're sitting the line, let's say you're part of my departmental team. I say, Miljan, hey, tell me about, we're going to focus in on liberate thinking, particularly today, and what new and innovative are you bringing to the table now to share with others? And you kind of scratch your head and go, God, I didn't think you're really serious about that. Awesome. Yes, I'm serious about that. So be aware that next time, next meeting, next week, I'm going to be asking the same kinds of questions. It is getting that repetitive questions that are important, not necessarily having all the answers for that. Well, what is it that we're doing to anticipate change? What is it we're doing to generate confidence, initiate action, liberate thinking, evaluate results? Helps bring about that kind of change and transformation, and it's done within that area of evaluating results, because now it's not just the metrics and the measures. Yeah, that's stuff that we do now, and there are a number of tools and techniques that are involved in that, but this is as much about being able to ask those questions and also give immediate feedback, in terms of a real clarity of dialogue of what the expectations are and an agreement between you on that.
Great. That is really interesting. I'm just thinking in the sense of things that I've done with organizations and individuals, in this capacity. And, there's always stories around, whatever model you have or when you take people through a certain model. So do you have or any stories that you could share maybe of how maybe some of your clients have used this model and the assessment or the fitness check to kind of, how they have used it, and maybe any stories that came and results that came out of that?
Lots and lots of stories. That individual example that I gave of a high-tech organization, a Fortune 50 company, where I was working with, a senior-most leader in the technology side of the organization, and really I served as his executive coach, so that we did a 360, and he got feedback in terms of that, and as part of that, he really needed to work on listening more. So he was generating confidence and asking more questions to enable his team to develop. He was losing good people. They were leaving the organization. They were wanting to move to different departments. He was the one that 99% of the time had the right answer.
Yeah.
But his role, his real role, his key role was developing future leaders, for that organization. Another is, and I'll share the name because the name is even changed. We worked over 5 years with Turner Broadcasting. And Turner Broadcasting was later on acquired by AT&T and is now known as Warner Media. But over a 5-year period of time, they knew that they needed to adjust and adapt to the marketplace and become more digital. So there was the digital aspect of becoming more agile was important to them, but they also agreed that their leaders needed to demonstrate agility as well in order to support this whole transformation that was going on. So over a 5-year period of time, we basically taught them about the Agile model. We also certified internal coaches to utilize and apply the Leadership Agility Profile 360. So all of these, there were 40 in each group that went through this training over a 5-year period of time. These were their high potentials. They were going through this. Mostly were senior directors and VPs and above that attended this particular program. But they got the individual assessment. They were provided feedback about that. that information was utilized during the training itself. And then 6 months later, we implemented the organizational agility profile, which in essence, captured the agility of their business unit. So that in fact, now you have a leader that knows the language, the terminology of anticipating change and generating confidence and initiating action, and why that was valuable for his or her leadership, and also saw the value in that in terms of what does that mean for their business unit now. The context has changed. Now it's about the business unit. How well did the business unit anticipate change and generate confidence and initiate action, et cetera, and utilize that to bring about the transformation that Turner Broadcasting made. That's a larger scale, type of implementation effort. That's a good example.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for sharing those. Another thing that kind of stood out for me in the book is the focus on Agile, HR agility process and audit, but also, what could you maybe elaborate on that part, and where does, HR fit into this, and why is it important for HR? Probably finance, could be thrown into that mix too, and other parts. Usually they're the last ones to embrace the change.
Yeah, oftentimes you'll find, or at least I've found over the years, and I've been in this consulting world now for maybe 40 years, something like that. Focused on agility, obviously, with agility consulting for the past 20 years. HR typically is the organization that has the budget, has the focus on leadership, leadership development, team development. They've got many of the, they are the process owner, if you will, for many of the enterprise-wide implementation efforts. Now, granted, there'll be pockets of activity around in different departments, but when you look at where the budget typically it's going to be held by the chief human resources officer, the chief CHRO, or the chief learning officer, or some combination of those.
And we're talking about the development budget, not the company, but like other budgets that are held by the or within the finance. But this is, we're talking about budget that the HR gets. The budget that HR activity.
The budget that HR gets to be able to help come up with the programs, the processes, et cetera, to enable the organization. It may be a big change, transformation initiative. They typically are going to be the ones, because it involves people. It involves people and the allocation of training dollars to them. So most large organizations, I would say medium and large organizations, typically would have the CHRO be the one who is primarily accountable for that. And that's where the budget would reside. So they're critical partners, I think, in any implementation effort. And oftentimes it's important, if an effort is begun somewhere else, I think it's important to try to early on loop in and link in the CHRO, the chief learning officers, so that they feel like they're engaged, they're involved. They contribute to the overall success.
Do you think there is a place for roles like that in a modern agile office space? Because the way that, and there's a couple of examples, and I've talked to Rena, that wrote Agile HR book, and she's saying like the learning is happening at a much faster pace, where like the role of HR, traditional departments, similar to change management, needs to evolve, where they enable learning, and the learning is contextualized and decentralized to the teams, because they know best what they need to learn, rather than being more of a centralized effort that used to be in the past. Do you have any thoughts on that, as far as like, completely, we're not talking about improving HR, but completely rethinking what HR stands for and how it supports the organization?
Yeah, I think if you go talk to the HR organizations and their professional associations, they would have a different point of view.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure
they
they would.
They would believe that. Okay, they would believe that they need to partner, with all of the other functional groups that are out there, and to truly understand what the needs are. That's been, it is critically important to get the dollars to those organizational units and better understand their needs. And any good CHRO, chief learning officer, is going to be doing that. They're going to be identifying what are those needs, what's going to make a difference, et cetera. I'm guessing I'm not going to see that. I need to probably pick up the book and take a little look.
It's interesting. There's a lot of, there's a lot of change. There's a company here in Boston, Vistaprint, that's a good example. And there are plenty of others where, we're moving away from the functions and more of, product-based teams and, the way that teams learn. For instance, Fidelity Investments gives their people 1 day a week. Well, most people get this, for professional development. And you can, I joke around, or somebody says we can watch, cat videos if we want. But it's more about giving people opportunity to learn whatever they think, with their team that they identify as the skill gaps, and developing those rather than having essential. And there's probably, you can always take things into extreme. There's probably needs for some type of balance between some centralized and some decentralized learning opportunities. But
yeah, I think the clients that we certainly have worked with that are CHROs, chief learning officers, et cetera, the ones that are certainly better. Their ears are to the ground, and they have partners that are in operations, et cetera. They're not, and they should not be, and they shouldn't be in that role if they are living in a world that says, well, we know everything about what you need to learn, and we are the keepers of the money, et cetera. It's just how organized the majority of organizations are organized today. I don't see things dissolving overnight. I don't see things happening in a way, and I know a lot of people would like them to be more autonomous, kind of units, et cetera. But it's going to take quite a while to be able to do that. I believe there's a bit yet to go there, and maybe get some more of these examples. As you said. The fidelity of being able to have one day a week. There've been other organizations
exactly
that push towards being able to do that, but do it in a way that is, it's not just going out and building the best kite and go flying a kite or something, but also is there going to be some benefit to the organization? You can enrich yourself by also enriching the organization as well. So how do we get the two, kind of
exactly together? And I think it goes back to that liberate thinking. It's crazy how time has flown by. It's almost an hour since we've been talking. Wow. What would be your closing thoughts or a message that you would like to leave us with? Sure.
I think to make this uncomplicated is important. And I think it's important to think of, again, the Agile model. Yes, there are a number of models and frameworks out there, but again, this is research that we've done over 20 years. And just think about the practical application of this, and also the language that can be repeated. The Turner example that I gave you, and there are many others. We're having a common language for leaders and employees to kind of get on board with this. It does say anticipate change is critically important. It doesn't necessarily define exactly how you're going to be anticipating change, but there are some techniques and approaches to doing that. It's really coming to grips with how do I, as a leader, understand where I am within this VUCA marketplace and this disrupted marketplace. Where do I stand with anticipating change and generating confidence, initiating action, liberating thinking, and evaluate results. It happens to spell Agile, so everybody should be able to remember that. And with that in mind, be able to think of it in terms of their own physical fitness. They go, you get a physical fitness test, and you listen to the doctor, and hopefully you're doing something because of that. Hopefully everyone sees that, okay, now I need my own development as a leader. Let me get that leadership agility fitness exam, if you will, and be able to understand what are the areas that I really need to focus in on, et cetera. And that may change a year from now. And so you may be in a different job, a different company, a different role. The marketplace may be changed. We may have a different pandemic. So how do you do that and keep it alive and breathe freshness into that so that it doesn't become an add-on to what you're doing as a leader? And you had mentioned the line that, well, I don't have enough time to complete a 360. Well, you don't have enough time not to do that. I mean, it should be, and it get to that point of being just as important as doing your annual physical exam to do your annual leadership agility fitness exam so that you can constantly be growing and building on that.
And I'm assuming it can be like a couple of thoughts, maybe just in closing, that it doesn't have to be annual. Like I think, it can probably be, quarterly or more frequently. So you can.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
And then the other piece is like, get a coach, get a friend, get somebody like, usually like I was never a gym person as far as like when it comes to like physical fitness, but I could always, if I had a friend going or if I was playing like some type of sport, it was another way to get in shape and be fit, So, for those that are listening, think about creatively what you can do to, in a way, evaluate and then also actually do something about whatever the results are showing to improve. And sometimes the biggest impediment is ourselves and trying to find somebody to help us, coach, friend, whatever it is, can help.
Two just last comments. Obviously, VUCA Masters, the book, is available through Amazon.com.
Great.
And then the other is this year, or at least the new year of 2022, we are launching VUCA Masters Academy, so that if there are those that might be interested in exploring just what the heck is VUCA Masters Academy, I'd be more than happy to chat with you about that and let you know what's involved in that.